Did you know that you're weird? You're wonderfully weird. Join us for the next few minutes as Drake Hunter, senior pastor at Elevating Life Church in Fort Morgan, Colorado, and author of the upcoming book Wonderfully Weird, helps us to understand how to live that wonderfully weird life to the fullest every single moment of every day. I'm your host, John Waters. Now, Wonderfully Weird Living with pastor and author Drake Hunter. Well, welcome to episode number 2 of Wonderfully Weird Living as Pastor Drake Hunter and I visit about the latest message. Drake, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me. And as we say at Elevating Life Church, hello.
Well, this past week, very interesting message, Streetlight People using the song Don't Stop Believin' by Journey. And as I listened to that message, very challenging in that putting the question out there, which are you, streetlight person or a spotlight person? And so I thought a very powerful message.
Very powerful because you have to examine yourself, and when you're asked the question and you're engaged, of course you're going to ask yourself, are you this streetlight person, or let's say streetlight Christian in this context, and do I walk in and out of the light, or am I constantly in the light, or at least constantly striving or seeking to be in the light? And how powerful that is if we're going to move forward in our Christian walk into that wonderfully weird life that we've all been designed to live in.
Well, let's delve into that a little bit if we can, what you mean by streetlight Christian versus spotlight Christian. So first of all, let's talk about that first side of it, streetlight Christian. What does it mean to be a streetlight Christian?
Well, what I mean is this. First and foremost, we have to understand both are Christians. I want to make that clear. And both are committed to Christ. So we're speaking towards or to the Christian who has made a commitment to Christ. They believe in Jesus Christ, and they believe and are devoted into this life now. So justification in the sense of salvation is not the issue here, or the difference. Or let me say this, either is identity or purpose, because you can understand your identity and your purpose, but yet still be a streetlight Christian. And so then where does this fogginess or the difference lie, I should say? Well, it lies in knowing and understanding. I'm going to say this, the greatness right off the top of my head, the great command. Many Christians misunderstand the great command and how to apply it to their life, to their life, so that they can be that spotlight Christian. So if we can recall that commandment, and there's several places we see it in the Old Testament, but in the New Testament, in Mark chapter 12, verses 29 and 31 says, Jesus answered. And we have to recall, Jesus is speaking to the religious system in his day, the religious system in the world. They're fixed-minded, and they're doing it their way. And of course, Jesus came to share what the relationship looks like with the Father, with him being the example of how to align that. So he's speaking to the world church, and he says the most important command, and he says this, hear. He says, hear, Israel, or hear, believer, hear, Christian, that the Lord your God, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. This is powerful, but let me continue with the rest of the command. It says this, and you shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, and with all of your mind, and with all of your strength. That's the first part of the command, and this is vitally important when it comes to your personal relationship with God the Father. And then he has the second command. Part of that command is, the second is this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these. This is the highest command that we need to get into ourself, if you will, so that we can truly walk in the light and in that spotlight of God. And now, if you think about this command, there's two sides. There's a moral side to it and an ethical side to this command. One has to do with that personal relationship with God in your own thought process, in that intra relationship that we have with God, versus the other side of the command, which is our neighbor, which is the inter relationship. And I always think of the interstate, where we have to share our lives together, driving and stuff. What a perfect example in the sense of the difference between the two. And we have to travel on the second part of this command has to do with traveling with others, with your neighbor. So one side is moral, the other is ethics. And how do we bring that together? First and foremost, to live that horizontal relationship with God, that vertical, I'll get it right, a vertical relationship with God, and then that horizontal relationship with your neighbor. That command clarifies that, but now we've got to seek after what that truly means in the sense of our ability in that communication with God and with others.
And there's, of course, intentionality in both of those, making the decision that I'm going to love God with everything I have and to love my neighbor, whoever that may be,
yes,
with everything I have as well. So is that where the difference lies between being that streetlight Christian and a spotlight Christian, is in the intentionality?
Well, the intentionality is in this. We have the choice to either do it God's way or our way. Mm-hmm. And so with that, we have to make a choice, and we have to we have to be intentional that first and foremost, we have to seek after God in what that means. Because oftentimes in our own subjective self, in our tradition, in our own experience and history, we want to define that. That's subjective in nature. So we have to be intentional in going and seeking after God, first and foremost, what that truth is of the Father, so that we can have the life as Christ demonstrated and the mind of Christ, where we align ourselves with that direction intentionally, and then get that objective truth into our memory, into our mind. So then when we're communicating with others, we're speaking in the voice of truth, or God's truth, the Father's truth, for self and perhaps for other. And then that relationship with others, that we're not with authority in our own self giving the definition of whatever that is. And so intentionality, yes, but we have to go deeper in the sense of intentionality with the truth of God versus whatever our own truth is. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. So we can kind of walk in and out of those then to some extent. Yes, we're striving to be the spotlight Christian, but yet there are times I know in my own life where I would have to define myself as a streetlight Christian.
I think we all can relate to that. However, what is it? Well, the first part of that command is love God with all of your mind. That means mindfulness. And you used the first part of mindfulness, and that's intentionality. And then, of course, giving proper attention to that with a proper attitude, kindness, and curiosity. And so that's where God's love comes into the place. When we slip out of that, first and foremost, know that because of God's love, His mercy, we're forgiven. And God's going to show undeserved friendship towards us because of His grace, but we get quickly back into that light, and it's remarkable how quickly it happens when we are intentional with it, and then we become mindful through our own day with let's say that conversation we're having throughout the day with God. Paul said, the Apostle Paul, to be in prayer at all times.
Right.
That's that vertical communication, and that we're making sure that those objective thoughts, those thoughts are objective, and that we are making our choices based on that truth of God, His direction, first and foremost for our life, and then for others. And so the solution there is being mindful, waking up every morning. God, here I am. I'm engaged I'm with you. But when we slip in and out of it because of some, let's say, implicit biases or habits that we might have, we get ourselves quickly back into the light. And then as you're developing that, Caroline Leaf and some other great Christian psychologists, pathologists say, it takes about 40 days. And that's an interesting number in the Bible, where if you can consistently do that for that time period, you're going to start really changing the heart now versus the conscious mind. Get it into the heart, and that street light tendency will slowly, it's nothing's done in a microwave in the Christian life, will slowly get to that point if you can consistently do that for a few months.
What role does fear play in this? And there's a couple of ways to look at that. The fear of God in that healthy respect for God's truth, His ways, as opposed to fear of God and the lightning bolt kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, the fear of God has to do with our highest priority or value in the sense of our worldview. Or can I say our philosophy in life? Because oftentimes we misinterpret fearing God. We should fear that we are not getting that objective truth into our mind, into the heart, so that the fear is not living in the promised land or that wonderfully weird life we're speaking about. And so it comes down to that philosophy of life, which is God, period. We're created in the image of God. He created us with an identity, with purpose, with direction. And when we live outside of that, our life is a mess, and that's what we should fear, rather than the fear of, let's say, guilt and shame or whatever comes our way. And isn't that kind of where the heart is when we're running to God, saying, I'm such a chaotic mess in that sense of conditioning and everything that has happened in life, that this worldview of mine, fearing not pleasing other people and not being a peacemaker, as we talked about last episode, that fear, and so we make the decision, we repent of the way that we're doing it, we humble ourselves and turn to the objective truth of God so that we can get that chaos into order. And then that just becomes our worldview. And if that is our worldview, our philosophy of life again, Jesus Christ, and we're focused on that, we're intentional, we're mindful, watch out, world.
So is that the first step then in becoming that spotlight Christian, repenting of doing it our way, and then turning around and seeking God's truth and striving to do it His way?
Yes. So, many Christians repent of their worldview, their philosophy of life. That's known as justification when it comes to salvation. And so that's just one belief, and we make that the highest belief in our system, in our own personal system. And what happens typically for streetlight people, they think, okay, all is good now, no intentionality, no mindfulness, and I'll just live my life. Well, it just doesn't function, or it doesn't operate or function that way. It is actually getting ourselves to that place of humility at first. Jesus said, very first command in Matthew, repent, and repent of your worldview. Then with the, let's say, and I've heard this and I know it to be true in my own life, that we have hundreds, if not thousands of beliefs. Then we have to start examining or assessing those beliefs. And then every belief that comes our way, we have to say, is this objective first and foremost? And if it is objective, according to proper interpretation, with the proper sources and all that, we get that in place, we repent of that belief, humble ourselves, and then get that into our system so that we can truly live out this beautiful life that God so desires for us to live out. And so belief, if you recall in Luke 8:50, he said, don't be afraid, just believe. Well, that is referring to that objective truth of God the Father. First and foremost, with how He created you, with that value system now in place, with purpose and along with your identity, go after it now with other people. Now the ethical side of it comes in with those beliefs.
Well, and that perfectly leads into right where I wanted to go next, and that is then living out that spotlight Christian attitude and worldview with other people, and how it impacts not only myself but those around me.
Yes, and if we understand the Old Testament and the New Testament, I think we have a better understanding of the way, because we look and we read the Old Testament and we see these ethical laws. Well, that makes sense because God created Adam and Eve, and that personal relationship has to be perfect at the very beginning. So the issue wasn't moral issue at that point, is now stepping out. They made a moral choice, that first sin, right, to step out of the garden. Now they're living together. They both stepped out together, and now slowly, they're the morals of all of that is slipping away. But up front, the morals were there, but they didn't know how to live together. So now we have this story, this promise that God has given you, and we see these ethics, the 10 Commandments, and how to live with one another. So that has to do with the second part of the great commandment, to live with your neighbor, to love your neighbor as yourself. And then, of course, as time went by, the morals slipped, and then, of course, God said, I need to show you how to do it. I'm going to put myself into matter, and then this is how you morally do it. And the New Testament reintroduces what's already in place at the very beginning, that moral aspect of our belief system. And you kind of get each other, you don't, but now we've got to get the morals back on track. And so the New Testament shows us that process. Now we have the Christian church. Now we are striving to get back to the garden, to the promised land, or that wonderfully weird living, not only for ourselves, but together. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. So both sides of that, love God with all of your heart, mind, soul, and strength.
Right.
And maybe the part that we don't get is in the love your neighbor as yourself, is that carries over with all of your heart, mind, soul, and strength as well.
Oh, yeah. It's very, it carries over, but again, objectively, because isn't that the challenge, why we have so many different relationships that are struggling or broken, is because first and foremost, objectively, for our own personal relationship, the specific revelation of God and who we are has to be in line. And then we, as we see with Paul and Timothy, Paul's mentoring Timothy and says, you got to get that proper so that then you can lead others. So lead self first, lead others, and then we can go another step and say lead organizations. But it must be done properly if we're going to be effective and efficient in our leadership overall.
And always looking at the ultimate mentor, which is Jesus Christ.
Always focused on Jesus Christ. And of course, our neighbors, if you think about it, it's a human being throughout history. I have a mentor, Dr. Ray Lincoln. He is my source at this time. He is feeding me because he's a neighbor that's closer and more in that spotlight than me. So here he is feeding his life into me now with that objective truth and understanding who I am with the understanding of Jesus Christ and how the whole picture works. And then he's drawing me closer and closer as that messenger of God to Jesus Christ. So how important is our neighbor? But we have to be very discerning and making sure that we're making proper choices with that. And it's not based on our own interest, our own preference, or even our own likings. It's based, again, on that objective truth, that unbiased truth that we might not like, might not even be interested in, and then get into the like-mindedness of that with, of course, God, the Father's direction in your life. Align your life with Jesus, with your neighbor, to get you to be that person that God needs you to be, to carry out His will and His plan.
One of the things I've heard people say in the past, and it wasn't specifically about being a spotlight Christian, but yet it feeds into that, is, and it comes back to that fear again, the personal fear of Of course, obviously, the brighter your own light shines, the more people will look to you, wondering what it is that's causing that to happen. Why, people who don't know Jesus Christ yet, looking to you as that representative, whether they know it or not, and people being fearful of having people look at them as that representative, but yet that's exactly what we're called to be, the salt and the light in the earth. And so as we move more and more toward that spotlight Christian way of seeing things and way of doing things, I think we find that our fears were maybe misinterpreted.
Perfect. Misinterpreted in the sense of, once again, we're interpreting it in our own understanding, our own traditions, our own conditioning. And isn't that what humility is all about, is stepping outside of all of that, whoever's fault it is, or whatever that might be for you, to say, wait a second, it's been proven, there's evidence that you can truly live a consistent, happy life, that wonderfully weird life we're after. And it's been done. Perhaps maybe I need to make some adjustments. Again, humility, being humble, saying, but you must ask yourself, in my own paycheck, self-paycheck, or motivation, whatever that might be, am I truly satisfied? Am I content as a human being? And if not, it's not God's fault. It's our fault. We need to humble ourselves and say, okay, where do I need to adjust my life to really get me to that place I want to be and have been created to live in? And so, again, humbling yourself, asking for help. Oh my goodness, we can sit here and just that alone, that fear of asking for help is a stumbling block for so many in our culture today, because we've been taught to be independent. I understand that, but we have to be careful because we have to have the right humility, and we do need to ask for help when we need it, because we're only a limited human being. We only have so much time, and when that energy, that time, and even that direction is out of focus, what are you going to do? Continue to do the same thing over and over and over again? Doesn't the Bible say, for the wages of sin is death? And so, fear is misinterpreted, and so.
Well, it comes back to, we talk about the 5 expectations amongst our leadership team a lot, and it comes back to a couple of those, I think, in that, first of all, making that commitment to growing in all of those areas, because it's our responsibility to do so. And as we grow, we realize it's not us people are looking at anyway. They're looking at Jesus. We're just the mirror.
That's right. And those standards are, we can even call them ethics, expectations for the team, where we've put in place where it's not about me, it's not about you, it's about the bigger picture. Well, that reflects the standard of generosity and who God is. And then, of course, we value people. And, of course, that includes self, because I am a people.
and it includes people who don't know Jesus Christ.
Doesn't know, it's all people. We value human beings, so that requires a different mindset. We have to be open-minded to God's truth versus to whatever our conditioning has been, even, I'm going to say, in the religious world, because isn't that Jesus, again, going back to Jesus, he was speaking to the religious system who are fixed-minded rather than growth-minded, in the sense of who the church should be and needs to be for these people that are searching and looking for the way. And so how important are these standards? They just reflect God and his attributes, but then also set up some values, some standards for us, so that we can truly, first and foremost, live in God's direction, whatever that might be for a team or a church or a marriage or whatever. And so that we can have those standards and be going in the right direction, and with love, going through all those, and I won't go through them all this morning, but we got to have those different expectations and standards of God, so that we can truly enjoy doing this together with the flexibility and the being moldable as a team and stuff, so that we can truly make an impact in our day and age, be relevant with the message in Jesus Christ today.
So then it seems to me that as a result of that, then we become that spotlight Christian. It's not that we're trying to front door being a spotlight Christian. It kind of comes as the result of just doing the little things and being intentional and seeking after God.
A spotlight Christian by no means I'm all that in a bag of Doritos with the Mountain Dew on the side, which is the world understanding. But that spotlight Christian in the sense of I'm focused, I'm using intentionality, paying attention, and truly having a proper attitude and allowing that objective truth to truly direct my life, align my life to the Father's direction as an individual and collectively. And so through that, as we're developing and growing, because isn't that, we step into the light, if you will, but we're immature. We got to humble ourselves and understand that too. Just like physical birth, spiritual birth parallels that, where our responsibility is not growth. Our responsibility is being responsible and being intentional with that and getting ourselves back into that light. And if you can't do it yourself, you have an accountability system, just like you do with your parents growing up, to get you tighter and tighter into that light so that you can become a self-sufficient human being in the mind, in the heart, in the soul, and with all of your strength. So then you can do likewise. And then now we have generations after generation doing it. And then that spotlight grows rather than becomes weaker and weaker with our own subjective understanding.
Wow. Well, I think that's a great place to kind of end for today. A lot to chew on in there, and I certainly hope that folks listening to this will take the time to really delve into it and ask themselves some hard questions about what they are doing in their own lives as far as being intentional and growing towards God's truth. And any final thoughts, Drake?
Well, my only final thought is going back to what you shared is Luke 8:50. Don't be afraid, just believe. And if you can do that with the proper guidance with self and others, you're going to do remarkable things and you're going to live a wonderfully weird life.
All right, Drake, thank you so much. Look forward to episode number 3 coming up next week. By the way, those of you listening, if you have any feedback you'd like to send us, please do so. Let us know if you have any questions or any comments, anything like that. We would love to hear from you. Just email us at wonderfullyweirdliving@gmail.com and we'll address that. So thank you very much, Drake, and we will visit again next week.
Thank you.
Find out more about your uniqueness when you get your own copy of Drake's book, Wonderfully Weird, available in the fall of 2019. And please email us with your questions or comments at wonderfullyweirdliving@gmail.com. Join us again next time as we continue to explore wonderfully weird living. I'm John Waters. Thank you for joining us.